Welcome to ART,
the Adventure Race Training Podcast.
I'm Nick Hurff.
And I'm Jason Magness.
And with years of coaching experience and formal education in human performance, we've helped numerous athletes to achieve their goals and increase their self-efficacy. My background comes from formal graduate level education, coaching a variety of collegiate teams and professional endurance athletes. My athletes range from everyday racers to NCAA All-Americans and multiple world record holders.
And I'm the captain of Team Bend Racing. I've devoted the past 2.5 decades of my life to adventure racing, competing at the top level for over a decade. But I draw a lot of my coaching and training philosophy on my years as a top-level climbing, acrobatics, and highlining coach, essentially trying to minimize the learning curve on notoriously difficult sports. I've also coached a few world champions, so together, Nick and I have some great successes.
Ultimately, we're here to share our knowledge and expertise with the community to help you prepare for your next big race. Our goal is that these conversations provide valuable insights to elevate your adventure.
All right, let's get started.
All right, welcome everybody. So today we are talking about heart rate variability, or HRV. Jason, you've been using this for quite a while, I believe, right?
I have been using this I feel like I discovered it, but that's not true. I do a lot of research, and oftentimes the way that I do it kind of discovers things early. This is total segue, but I'm going to tell this story as an example. Early in my days as a climbing coach, I owned a climbing gym in North Dakota, and this must have been in the 90s. No, maybe early 2000s. But I remember kind of discovering partially hydrogenated oil, right? It's been around for long, but like this idea of partially hydrogenated oil and how bad it was. And yet it was in everything. Like it was, this was when the heart health people were like anti-butter, and it was all partially hydrogenated oil in everything. I did some research, and, there were the papers that were basically early saying this stuff is toxic. It's causing all these problems. But the food industry was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And so at my climbing gym, we banned it. So it was hilarious. We completely banned anything with partially hydrogenated oil from the climbing gym. And these young kids would walk in, and we would look at whatever they would be carrying, some drink or some smoothie or just snacks. And we'd look at the thing. I was young too. I was in my 20s, and we'd literally take it out of their hands and throw it in the garbage. And we'd point to the sign that said no partially hydrogenated oil. Right. And, I went to my parents' house and pulled it out of the cupboards and stuff like that. And then lo and behold, 3 or 4 years later, there's the national movement to ban it or educate people in foods. And now it's gone from Twizzlers and from Twinkies. And they just had to reformulate all these foods because it was essentially a low-level metabolic poison that we were eating in huge things. So it's the same thing with HRV. I remember reading something about it before anybody... before it was widespread and in the watches, and you had to get a special device to measure it. And to me, it really made sense. So that the science of it made sense. But so that I don't butcher it, Nick, because you are ultimately, I'm going to always refer to you as the scientist in the podcast. So can you explain to people what HRV is?
Of course. So HRV is heart rate variability. So it's a heart rate derived metric. So to think of it, your heart rate would be beats per minute. So how many beats is your heart rate in a 60-second period? When you sleep, that would be more of your resting heart rate is when you're at rest. It can be measured when sleeping or just laying on a couch completely still, for example. So RHR. And when you see smartwatches, you get all this different heart rate data. And so those are just some basic ones people will see. Then when you go to HRV, heart rate variability, it's a little more complex. Essentially, it measures your nervous system and is an indicator of your autonomic nervous system. So when you have your nervous system, you have two main parts, your somatic and your autonomic. Your somatic is the things you can control and move. So I'm moving my fingers right now, or I'm lifting my knee, moving my neck. Those are things that I can think about and control. Your autonomic are processes from your nervous system that are automated and you can't directly control. So this is where you get your two sides of the autonomic, your sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your sympathetic's your fight, flight, freeze kind of side. So imagine, you see a saber-toothed tiger is a typical analogy. all of a sudden.
Wait. Do those still exist? Because I thought they were extinct. I thought you were the scientist here. Do I need to know about saber-toothed tigers coming back?
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure my
Okay.
puppy is part Velociraptor and
Okay.
saber-toothed
All
tiger.
right.
So Jason sees a saber-toothed tiger, and all of a sudden, tons of things happen. Right, heart rate spikes, glucose fires from the muscles, glycogen was released, glucose into the blood. He's ready to go. His heart rate is, edge. His hair goes up. He's dialed in. Adrenaline hits. All these things happen automatically without you even thinking about them, right? And there's dozens and dozens of different reactions that happen through the body without you even thinking about it. One of them is the heart. The other one is kind of your rest, relax, digest. So if you're super stressed, you're kind of more on this sympathetic, anxious drive. And then if you relax, let's say you get a massage or a facial or something, and you start to relax and you feel that stress kind of melt away, you're now more in that parasympathetic rest, relax, digest kind of side. X, for example, falls into that side. And so those are just kind of two different things where all of a sudden hormonally, with your endocrine system, your nervous system, all these different bodily functions, everything happens and you can't control it directly. You can try to do deep breathing, for example, and different stuff. And the neat thing about breathing, right, is something we'll probably get into with deep breathing. Your breath is something you can control, and you also at times don't control. It can happen both. And so that's a link to where you can consciously try to control your breathing to then stimulate your body to kind of switch over into one of those two sides, depending how you do the breathing.
And breath, again, this is a whole nother topic. I spent 20 years as a yogi doing pranayama, which is basically this yogic whole body of yogic work and study where we use the breath because it is both like controlled consciously and controlled unconsciously. Like it's that somatic and autonomic. Like if you don't breathe, your body makes you breathe. You breathe when you sleep without thinking about it because you've got these various physiological responses that trigger that. But you can also choose how deep you breathe, when you breathe, increase your breathing rate when you're exercising, decrease it if you want to calm down. And so a lot of the yogis think of that as that link with breath control that you can actually start to impact your heart rate, your heart control, your circulation, all those things. So it's kind of cool to see that now in the exercise physiology side of things, finally kind of like coming to the forefront for a lot of athletes.
Exactly.
So to kind of explain, well, let me just jump in. One of the ways, because like everything you said is amazing, right? And one of the ways that I first had it explained to me, like HRV, more of a layman's term, was essentially, when with that heart rate, right, with that HRV, you have these two sides of that autonomic nervous system, essentially. I don't know if it would be right to say, but kind of battling for control, right? Or opposed with each other. And that's the important thing that heart rate variability starts to measure, right? Of like kind of where that needle is, right?
Yep. So when you look at HRV on your smartwatches, you'll see a number between typically 30 to 120, somewhere in that range. And everybody's different. So when you get a baseline, that's just personal to you. There's some trends that you see, but in general, that's where you're at. And what that number is actually milliseconds. So what it measures, so let's say you have 3 heartbeats, boom, boom, boom. Well, they're not actually all the same distance of space between heartbeats or the same amount of time in between heartbeats. There's a variance. So to exaggerate, it might go boom, 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 right? And so they're exaggerated. When you take that, so let's say there is 120 milliseconds between beat 1 and 2, and then there is 30 milliseconds between 2 and 3, 120 minus 3 or 30 is 90. So then your HRV just for those 3 heartbeats comes to 90 milliseconds.
Right. That's the difference between, like if it was the same exact thing, you'd have a heart rate variability of 0. Like if down to the millisecond, every heartbeat was 120 milliseconds apart, your HRV would be 0. Right.
Correct.
And so you're measuring kind of in some ways how sporadic or how there's these little differences in your heart rate. And there's a range of that's really healthy. And I think it's important for, before we go on, for people to realize, do not Google what is a good HRV, right? This is not a good thing to Google because a good HRV depends on the person. What you need to do is establish what your system has as a baseline, like Nick said. You don't just want to look at something and never have measured it and measure it one time and be like, ooh, mine's at 80 right now. And Google said that that's good. Because normally, if your HRV was higher, that 80 might be low, or somebody, that might be really high for them. So it really is important to get the baseline, and then you have really good metrics that you can look at. So carry on, Nick.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're in this sympathetic fight, flight, freeze kind of side, your heart rate is going to be more exact with the timing. Regardless of if it's faster or slower, it's going to be more consistent. So those milliseconds of space are going to be more evenly spaced. Whereas when you're in the parasympathetic rest, relax, digest, they're going to be more fluctuating as well. And so in general, the higher your number is, it's kind of a middle ground, but in general, the higher your number, it's showing that you can go back and forth a little better between your fight, flight, freeze side and your rest, relax side. Because your body will switch those switches on and off quicker is kind of what you're thinking about. Another side piece is if you were to have multiple different devices on you tracking HRV, you might come up with slightly different numbers. And that's because all of these have kind of proprietary algorithms they use. So there's things like skipped heartbeats that happen in almost everybody each day a few times. So if you're sleeping at night, just by having a skipped heartbeat, if it didn't try to algorithmically, that's the right word, identify those and eliminate those outliers, it would be very inaccurate. And so each different device, so like Garmin versus Whoop versus these, all have a slightly different algorithm they use on how to calculate it and estimate it for a whole night of sleep. So your number might vary a little based on what you're using. So also if you switch devices and you notice a big change or a change of like 5 or 6 overall, it could just be the device. Sometimes even a firmware update can change it a little bit. So like if you see, oh man, my HRVs dropped by 4 this week to last week, it could be a firmware update.
Yeah. And so I would recommend finding a device. And one of the things that I think has improved a lot in the last decade or 5 years especially is it used to be that, I used to I was an early adopter of the Oura Ring. And one of the reasons for that was the HRV. But as an athlete, we've talked about what it is, but like, how do we use it as an athlete? One of the things that I do is, it's annoying. You either wear my watch, or there are times I want to take my watch off for months at a time. And then I go back to the Oura Ring and I establish a baseline with each different device, like Nick was talking about. But it's a great indicator what happens while you're sleeping, right? Because if your heart rate variability is pretty low, and it kind of gets confusing if you don't think about it. A low heart rate variability means that you're more in that fight or flight because that means there's very little variation between your heartbeats because your system is controlling that, and it's like super, super quote accurate, which isn't necessarily right. Or stress. Yeah, stress is a better word. So when that heart rate variability goes low, that's usually an indication. If you wake up, that's the first thing I do in the morning. Well, not the first thing. Sometimes I roll over and say good morning to my wife, but like at some point I'm checking my watch and it measures those metrics overnight, and it will tell me what my average heart rate variability. You can look at each individual like hour by hour if you want, but really I'm looking at that average, and that will tell me that as I went through the night, oftentimes I'll go to bed and it's pretty low because I've had stress, a big workout, it's in that recovery. But if it improves, and gets to a more of my normal baseline, higher HRV by the morning, that means I'm good. I'm feeling good. I'm ready to train again. Things are probably on track. And then when it's pretty low, which I recently just went through a period where I had a big training block and I was kind of had this whole schedule and I had to shift and pay attention because my HRV kept being what they call unbalanced or low. It was lower than it had been in a while, and it just wasn't recovering. So I was either fighting a bit of sickness, a little bit of overtraining, not getting good enough sleep. There's all these factors that can go into it. But at the end of the day, that was a really good wake-up call for me to be, hey, if I really want my training to be effective, today's probably not the best day to do another threshold workout. right? Because that's just going to push things down further, and my body's not having that opportunity to recover. The HRV is a great indication of that. When you're recovered, right, and healthy and drinking enough water and getting enough sleep, where's your HRV, Nick?
It's going to be higher.
Yeah, it's going to be higher. It's going to be in that baseline range that your body has established. And I don't want to tell people that like, hey, you wake up one day and your HRV is low and you shouldn't go do your planned training. But, HRV, I think, is a lot about trends, right? For me, it was, oh, I'll probably recover. I just didn't get great sleep last night. But when that happened 3 or 4 days in a row, and then you start to notice that, yeah, I am more fatigued. I'm tossing and turning more at night. Something's going on. And a smart athlete pays attention to those things because it's really easy to just get a schedule of workouts from your coach and then say, I got to do what my coach says. But if you're not taking ownership of kind of your own body and your own stress responses, your coach doesn't know that. Right. And so I think it's been really beneficial for me and for a lot of my athletes to, it's not an excuse. You don't get to wake up and say, oh, my HRV. Like if your HRV keeps being in the toilet, like low, 30 milliseconds, that's what mine was, which is pretty low for me. But it's a good indication to ask some more questions, right? That's what I use it as.
Yeah. And that might be your baseline too. So mine used to be in the 30s as well. And I was just in a very high stress career field, right? Kind of like corporate style type career field in the military and all. And it was super low. And then the further I was out, it got higher and higher and higher over time. And so it was just kind of that. And that's one thing as well is it's not just physical stress, but mental, emotional, all those stressors impact the HRV.
Yeah.
And so a way to think about it is that HRV is an indicator of what your readiness is to train as well and for your body to adapt. There was some really neat research done. So pretty much the leader in HRV guided training for endurance athletes in the scientific community, a couple different researchers, one in Spain, but the main one's Daniel Plews. He's out of, I believe, Auckland Institute of Sport in New Zealand on the north side. And he's a former Olympic triathlete, and he just has tons of research on it. One of the things they looked at was taking trained cyclists, so semi-pro, pro-level cyclists, split them in 2 different groups. And on the 2 different groups, you had one that did the standard training that was programmed for the teams, and the other one did the training program guided by HRV, meaning that the trainers would look at their HRV and decide whether they were going to do the planned program or shift things around. And so the chart they used essentially showed that if they would do a hard workout, for example, intervals or something, the next day their HRV is low. So if their HRV is low, they would go to an easy session, aerobic base building. Then the next day, if their HRV is low again, they go again. And then if their HRV is good, they stick with a low one. And if it's good 2 days in a row, then they would do another hard interval session, right? Meanwhile, the other group just stuck with the baseline, like Tuesdays are this day, Thursdays are that day, et cetera. Kind of what you get like a college cross-country team type thing.
Yeah.
So what they found at the end of all this, and then there's been meta-analysis kind of proving the same thing, was that there isn't too much of a difference in the adaptation between the 2 groups. However, you'll see a slightly better when it comes to like, peak power output at 40 seconds and different things in the HRV guided group. So you'll see over 16 weeks, for example, slight changes. Well, that indicates that if you were to do this for 2 years, there's probably significant changes.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is the groups that did the HRV guided training, their volume that they trained was about 75% of the volume of the groups that did traditional training, which is huge because when you're looking at injury prevention, which comes mostly from volume, you're telling me I can cut 25% of my training out and get the same or slightly better effects.
And, not to mention like having a work-life balance or an athlete-life balance, right? So if you can pay a little bit more attention to your HRV and that actually reduces your training volume because the training that you are doing is more effective, and that also gives you a little bit more leeway for family time, fun time, whatever it is, reading, it's kind of like this, it's not a quick fix, right? But it's something that if you're not paying attention to, right now as an athlete you should start paying attention to. It's on almost every device, and you don't have to let it dictate your training, but it can be an easy guide. And most smartwatches now and rings give you a readiness score, which you don't even have to look at the HRV necessarily, but most of the good algorithms have a readiness score that is based on a number of things, including fairly heavily weighted HRV. So you can have got really great sleep, but if your HRV is in the tank, then sometimes that's just you're getting sick. Like that's when I notice it a lot, is like my kids were sick, and then I know whether I caught that thing or not, because I might still feel okay or just have that little cough that you think, oh, it's not really anything. But if I wake up the next morning and my HRV is in the tank, right? I'm like, damn it, you know, damn it, son, you got me sick. But that's part of being a parent. And then I'll be like, hey, I can actually get better faster if I don't do this VO2 max workout on the day I woke up after I have this cough and my HRV is in the tank. It's just going to prolong my sickness. And so I'll just shift gears and have a couple easy days. I won't stop training. But like you said, there's a huge benefit to your HRV often by doing easy stuff, right? Like getting on the bike trainer for an hour with the fan blowing on you and just, doing a nice easy base workout. That's training, right? And that's smart training in a lot of instances.
Exactly, yeah. And if you're somebody who hasn't trained for a couple weeks because life got busy, just get back to training. So typically the first 2 weeks you're getting back into training is a transition period. And your body is just getting used to it again. So you can kind of take the HRV in the background, but just train for at least 2 weeks and then start looking at the HRV a little bit more for that, because the HRV will be off. And then as you progress through a training period, you're going to see that HRV overall kind of trend down a little bit because your body's more beat up, right? And then when you taper, do a recovery week, you should see it start to come back up in theory. Now, in practice, sometimes the HRV can be super scattered and it seems sometimes eclectic, especially if your life's a little scattered. So you're not going to look at HRV for, am I getting more fit? That's going to be more like resting heart rate, for example, which we can talk about on another thing. HRV is really just an indicator of, is my body ready to take on more stress?
Yeah. And that means, is it a good day for those harder workouts? Because once you're an athlete, a lot of those easier workouts, they don't add a lot of measurable stress. It's a whole nother podcast, but that's, this idea, especially for ultra endurance stuff, this idea of a rest day. For me, often a rest day is going for an easy 30-minute ride, right? Because that doesn't add stress. It's not like no exercise at all, sit on the couch. Like that's not a rest day. That's actually counterproductive for a lot of athletes. But yeah, using this HRV, because it is, and it also gives you permission to shift things up in the other way. Like there are times when, I will wake up and man, my HRV has been low and now it's back up. And then the next day it's like in that zone. And so sometimes I'll shift it the other way. I'll be like, yeah, I actually want to push harder today, or I should push harder today because I'll get better adaptation because I haven't had a big acute load for a while. And so that's a great indication too. If I'm just doing low level stuff, base stuff, eventually my HRV gets pretty high. It's almost like I want to shove it down, right? I'm like, no, I want to wake up with a low HRV. So I'm going to hammer it today. Right. I mean, I just did my last big pre-Worlds workout yesterday, this thing called the Bike Beast. And yeah, I woke up, let's see. I mean, what's your HRV right now, Nick? My HRV for last night, let's find out what it was. It is below, it's unbalanced, which means it's a little bit lower than normal because I had a massive load yesterday. I mean, it was nice. It bounced back by the end of the night, so it started to come back up. But it was definitely below, below it's kind of normal for a lot of the night. So yeah. So it's good workout.
My baseline's 48 to 64 milliseconds. It didn't load last night, but the last 3 nights were 51, 50, 49. So good workout.
Yeah. Yeah. And mine tells me that I should basically have a nice chill day. My average is, yeah. So I'm usually between the 60 and the 80 and I'm at a 58. So, just toward the bottom end, but it does mean that I'm just going to build my bike up and do a nice little spin today.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I hope this is helpful. And there's no law, but it is, it's really just a good, it's almost like, and I don't want to say a substitute for a coach, but it's good to have that. It's almost like a second opinion, if that makes sense, right? It's like when you go to the doctor and they're like, oh man, this is getting a second opinion is good. So the HRV kind of gives you that reality check that is unbiased, right? On how much you think you should be training, whether your last training was good. It's really this unbiased, scientific data that says, hey, your body is primed and ready, or yeah, maybe you should think about it if this trend continues. Like something is stressing you out. So because we all know that training super stressed. And I like to use, I don't necessarily like to use the word stressed. I like to use the word distressed. Like I don't like training distressed, right? Like when we train, we add stress to our system, right? But in my, like, the way I think about it, like distressed is when that stress lingers, right? And a lot of that can be emotional, that can be sickness, that can be overtraining, like you're just distressed. And to me, if I feel like I'm in that state or get an indication of my body, mind being distressed, I have to be really careful with how hard I train, because I just add to that. And then I'm 50. I don't like to waste my time. Like there's nothing worse. And I do it all the time. Like I'm human. So I'm like, oh, I really want to do this hard workout because I feel like I should. And then sometimes halfway through the hard workout, I'm just like, this was dumb. I'm not going to get the benefits from this that I would have if I had waited one more day.
Yep.
So,
Exactly.
as I get older with less time and less physical capability, there's a piece of me that is really looking at these things more and trying to be really effective in my training. And everybody can do that.
Exactly. At the end of the day, if you decide you're not going to use the HRV, then just be consistent, which is the number one thing. The HRV guiding your workouts can make the use of your time, I think, more effective.
Yep. And, you don't even really now have to get a special thing. Like we all probably have something that does HRV.
And one thing with these sensors we'll probably dive into is the accuracy of them. So for your heart rate, for your wrist-based, when you're sleeping or resting, getting resting heart rate, HRV, sleep cycles, those are all accurate within like 90 to 96%, which is good. When you're training and running and stuff, that's when the heart rate detected can be greatly variable depending on the sensor and the accuracy of it. So just keep that in mind. If you're like, oh, I'm going to go for a zone 2 that should be between these different heartbeats running, well, that may not be accurate of where your heart rate actually is. But for the sleeping data, HRV, resting heart rate, respiratory rate, all those, I mean, that's pretty accurate, very accurate with these devices.
Yeah. So happy HRVing, everybody. And yeah, we'll be back with lots more great discussions. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Look forward to more.